Cormier, our town historian, talking about how the courthouse came to Salem in 1869. Kay Crank will also be talking about a book that she wrote, A Bed for the Night, which has some interesting stories from the jail and just from the time that it was an actual courthouse. And then it's going to conclude with where we are today as the Preservation Association, how it was formed, and our mission today. So thank you for coming. We have 2 more lectures on Thursdays next week. Bob Ackland will be talking about cases that were tried here going back to the 1800s. And that'll be on March 21st. On March 28th, Jack Waite will be talking, and he is the architect that's working with us on preservation and restoration work. He will also talk about the renowned architect Marcus Cummings, who many of his buildings are in the Capital Region area, predominantly Troy, and he was a renowned architect of the time, and he is the one that designed the historic Salem Courthouse. So enjoy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Janice. Tonight we're having sort of a 2-part program. I'm going to try to fill you in on the background of the courthouse and how we got here. And the second part of the program is going to be by storyteller Kay Crank, who wrote the wonderful book about the jail, and she has stories that she would like to tell you about. I noticed tonight that we have St. Patrick's Day coming, and I see Larry O'Macaulay brought a shillelagh with him. So if you get out of line, watch out. Okay, I'm going to give you really a lot of details, but I think it's important that you know how this place all started, because it really goes back into the 1700s when the first courthouse was built, and it was built in 1796 on Main Street, where the town office is. That's where the courthouse is, and there's a great picture of that original courthouse, which is on the map, 1853 map. I don't know if any of you have ever seen that map, but it has a series of photographs of important buildings in the county, and that courthouse is right there. A beautifully done courthouse, done in wood, however. And that eventually did create a problem, because, as you know, wood, unless you keep it up, does not last very, very long. It was in that courthouse that we had the capital punishment take place, and 3 hangings took place in and around that courthouse in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Now, the courthouse, after a number of years, began to fall apart. And so some people in town decided that we needed a new courthouse, and went to the county and said we needed a new courthouse. Yet there were people on the other side of the county, Fort Edward, who said, we want the courthouse here. So you had this argument taking place. Where were they going to put this courthouse? Well, Salem at that time had some very wealthy and influential people, one of them being John and M. Williams, who said, I'll give you the land. And they said, okay, that sounds pretty good, but we need money, because it looked like it was going to cost about $30,000 to build a new courthouse at that time. And John M. Williams said, okay, between the village and the town, we will give you $10,000. And so they raised $10,000 from Salem, put toward the courthouse. So in other words, they paid 1/3 of putting up this new courthouse. Now, the other thing that happened at that time, which was 1869, the jail was also on Main Street, a wooden building, 2-story wooden building, and the question was, we need a jail. And John M. Williams said, don't worry about it, I'll move that jail up here, which he did. So the first jail that was in the back of this building was the old jail that was on Main Street. Now you may wonder, what happened to the old courthouse? Because a beautiful building, but of course falling apart. It was sold primarily and taken apart, and parts of it were made into a private school in that area. So that building is gone. We don't, we have no remnants of that building that I know of, that I'm aware of in the community. So we have a building here now in 1869, and this building, of course, has already been mentioned, that Marcus Cummings, who was a very, very popular and well-known architect in New York State, put up a lot of courthouses, came along and began to put up the courthouse. Have any of you been upstairs? Have you all been up to the courtroom? Do you ever wonder why the floor slants?
Yes.
Right. Marcus Cumming realized that in most communities there was no opera house. So he built the courtroom with a slanted floor so that you could have entertainment up in the courtroom. So the entertainment that we have seen here since the building became under the preservation group is not new. They had a lot of entertainment upstairs. They came from Boston, New York City, wherever. People traveled to put on shows so that they could make a living doing that. And many of those were done here at that time. Needed a place for the sheriff to live, or the jailer, as it was known. The building that's now a thrift shop was built as the jailer's house. Interesting thing about that is that the jailer's wife was expected to be the cook. So all the cooking for this courthouse, when it was originally built, was done in the jailer's house. And if you ever walk on that side of the building, you may notice that there are these square things in the wall. Take a look when you go out there. That was the dumbwaiter. So the food would go from the house into the dumbwaiter, would go up to the second floor and then up to the third floor. And then the food would be taken around and given to the prisoners. And that's the way the prisoners were fed for a number of years, until they decided they wanted to build a better kitchen out in back. And the first kitchen was in the same spot as the stone or cinder block kitchen is now. So you had 3 kitchens out back, which we used to feed the prisoners. But they did away with the dumbwaiter after a while, because they connected the kitchen to the back end of the jail. So instead of using the dumbwaiter, they would just bring the food in and then carry it upstairs to where it was needed. The courtroom was designated to hold 288 spectators on the main floor and 115 spectators in the balcony. Now today we don't use the balcony. It was recommended that we not use the balcony, so we're just using what we call the main floor of the courtroom. I mentioned that the courtroom was used for entertainment, and when you're a historian, people give you stuff. It just seems like it's a miracle. It just pours in here. But one of the items that I got one day was a printed program, 1890, saying that the Ladies Schubert Quartet of Boston was going to perform in the courtroom. There were others, I said, other organizations of entertainment that also did things in the courtroom. And again, within the last 15 years, we all know that we've had musicals up there. We did Inherit the Wind up there, because the courtroom was just a beautiful sight to put on that particular play, because it's done in a courtroom. So a lot of things have happened here. This place was really more than a jail. It was an entertainment center for many, many years, until the Proudfoot building got built, and then the opera part of that building took over. Now in 1906, once the wooden jail ended up getting condemned, part of the problem they discovered was that people could break out of it quite easily. It was a wooden jail. So the state came along and said, that's not going to work. We want you to build a brick jail, which they did. It was a 2-story brick jail. Then a few years later, the state again, in its infinite wisdom, said, okay, we have a lot of reforms now dealing with incarceration and the buildings that the criminals should be in. So you're going to have to sort of rebuild the jail, which they did. And they brought in an organization that built what we see now in 1906, the jail cells that are there. And they were done by a company that was expert in building jails. I don't know if you've been in the jail or not, but really that it's sort of like an erector set inside the walls. It's 3 levels of jail cells that are there. And really tough place to break out of. However, people did, and that's why Kay's here. She wasn't incarcerated. But she has stories about prisoners escaping and things of that sort. Now, the last time the kitchen was upgraded in 1956, as I had mentioned, and then 20 years later they redid the whole kitchen over again. In fact, the prisoners tore it down, and the prisoners built it out of a concrete block. And if you get a chance to go into the kitchen, it's a certified kitchen by New York State Health Department. It's a very nice kitchen. In fact, the kitchen is an important part of the courthouse now. And kitchen, Bob, is rented out.
Yeah, there are people that have their businesses where they sell products of various kinds, either online or they go to various places to sell, farmers markets, for example. But in order to sell products, they have to produce them in a certified kitchen. So we have one of the few certified kitchens in the area.
Right.
They rent the space from us when they need it.
And that's very good. I visited, was in Albany at the mall. One day they were having a big festival of foods being cooked, and in talking with one of the persons there, we got into the certified kitchen thing, and she said, I know what you mean. She said, in order for me to sell this, I had to build a certified kitchen. I could not use my own in the house. I had to build a separate certified kitchen. So the state is really sticky on giving you a license if you're going to sell food to the public. But we do have that here, and people have used it. I know we had a pickle maker here one time, and a few other
cupcake baker. And,
cupcake baker, right. So
Granola.
Granola.
And Iggy's, you guys probably know Iggy from Argyle Brewery.
What did he bake?
He makes falafels and things like that.
We had a mustard
Rolling
maker.
radish. That's
Mustard
another.
maker here one time.
Yeah, mustard maker.
Yeah.
So lots
it's-
of different businesses and
right.
caterers. You know, people that cater.
It's great to have here in our areas. As Bob has said, it's one of the few certified kitchens around. So spread the news to all your friends. Now, just a little timeline here. In 1982, the last grand jury trial was held here. It was a murder trial, and I believe Sarah Jane Cormier attended that trial. Was the owner of a bar over in the owner of a bar over in the Fort Edward area, and he bumped somebody off, and the trial was held here, and he was found not guilty. And when that happened, I could hear people saying, yeah, if you want to murder somebody, do it in Washington County, because they always get off. Oh, okay. Now, once the courthouse left, they built a new courthouse, over in Fort Edward, and once they were out of here, the sheriff took over the whole building, and this room stayed for a while as the part of the civil government, the surrogates room. This is where the deeds and letters of administration were housed. That's why you have this big walk-in vault here and the vaults over there. That's where all those important things were kept. And then once the new courthouse was finished in Fort Edward, they pulled all the civil cases out of here. Everything went over to Fort Edward. But as I said, the sheriff moved in, took over the whole building, and kind of cobbled it up. Because there were a whole lot of things that they had renovated, and poorly, to tell you the truth. But a lot of renovation went on, and it did operate as the sheriff's office and jail for a number of years. Now in 2003, by 2003, they had built a new jail in Fort Edward. That was a little controversial because at one point we thought they were going to build the jail here in the Rexley Road area. A lot of discussion, a lot of conflicting ideas, and eventually the county decided that they weren't going to build it here. We were going to build it over there. On one hand, it was devastating to our economy because a lot of the merchants on Main Street and other merchants relied on the fact that the jail was here because they sold their goods to the jail, to the workers. But that's the way it worked out. So we had no jail here anymore. Now, just one point I wanted to point out, because earlier we were talking about the number of sheriffs that have been in Washington County. And of the numbers who have been here, 14 were Salem citizens. So Salem was really involved in the jail. I think the last one we had here was Marty Westcott, if I remember correctly, who lived here in the village. Okay, now I'm going to jump into another phase of this. Now, how did we get here? Here we have a courthouse that's been moved. We have a jail that's been moved. But it didn't happen like today it was here and tomorrow it was gone. It was over a period of time that the thinking to make the county seat in Fort Edward only. You may not know that Salem was a half shire for many, many years. The term shire it means sort of a seat. Because we had a courthouse here first, and then later on Fort Edward built its courthouse. So you had court taking place in two different places at that time. I had done jury duty over in the old Fort Edward courthouse and in the new courthouse. I never did jury duty here. But the double shire concept worked, and it worked because, again, Salem had some very influential people in the community who insisted that we be part of that process. We can no longer be considered a half shire because there's no civil court here, there's no criminal court here anymore. So nothing of the county is here, except we do have a sheriff's building down on Route 22, and that's it. Now, when we knew that the sheriff was going to be leaving, and the sheriff had also taken over the little house out there. In fact, the sheriff, once they abandoned this building, he stayed there for a couple of years in that house. So we had sort of a substation of the sheriff's department in the old jailer's house. One of the rumors that was going around, and Bruce is here someplace. It's way back there. One of the rumors going around was that the county didn't know what to do with this building, so they thought maybe they would just bulldoze it. And as a historian, I got upset and spoke to the village board and to the town board about the fact that the building was an asset to the community. It had value, it was still usable, and to bulldoze it would just be a crime to do that. I approached the village board, told them that I thought they should get involved. There was an opportunity to perhaps get the building, and they thought about it for about 30 seconds and said no. Of course, they had the Proudfoot Bancroft building to deal with, and they felt that's enough. They did not want another building. I mentioned it to Bruce, And Bruce picked up the ball and he ran with it. And I'm grateful for him, for doing that, because he approached the board and approached the county, and eventually in numerous meetings between Bruce and myself and Kay Tomasi and Bill Eberly, going back and forth to the county, a deal was worked out whereby the county said, "Well, give me the building for $1." And a couple of years of oil, Bruce, was that it?
They were cash support to help.
Yeah, right. They were going to help us to get started by helping to pay for the fuel and things of that sort. So that worked out very well. Another thing that happened is I had seen Don Cummings and I knew each other, and Don at that time was the chairman of the board, and he was also on the hospital board where I could bend his ear and explain to him that I didn't think the building should be bulldozed, and he agreed. I said there has to be some other thing we can do. And he also was instrumental in helping to save this building. So I'm also grateful to Don for hearing us out. Now, you all know Joe Cutchall King. If you don't, Joe was the county historian for a number of years, and I knew Joe, and we talked about the courthouse, and he agreed with me and wrote a couple of articles for the newspaper that the courthouse should be saved. And I asked him to come to a Rotary meeting to talk about the courthouse and its importance, which he did. Gave a very nice talk, and at the end of the meeting, Bill Eberly stood up. Bill is a lawyer, and said, "I'd like to call a public meeting." And I said, "Great." And so Bill organized the first public meeting and invited the public to come in to hear about the courthouse and the fact that it was sort of on the market, and the opportunity for the town to take over the courthouse was there. But if the town took it over, then the town would be looking for a not-for-profit preservation organization. And it was Bill Eberly who personally went to Albany, to the State Ed Department, to do all the paperwork. Bill, being a lawyer, knew that if he went in person and said he was a lawyer, they would pay more attention than if I went down there. So he went down, spent the whole day, got all the paperwork done, and ended up getting the not-for-profit status and the preservation status. And I think we got that ruling in about a month, which was great. So we're now ready to roll at that point. And we had a lot of meetings. We had some really good people like Peter Sauer, who came in and said we need to have a charrette. I had no idea what a charrette was. It's a French word meaning a gathering of artisans and carpenters and whatever. It's a French term. Actually, a charrette is sort of like a wagon, and that's how they would get to where they were going to have this meeting. They would all climb aboard the charrette to get there. And we held 2 or 3 of those at the school, got as many people involved as possible, which I think was the most possible and best way that we could get the community to support the courthouse. People were very good about coming to meetings and expressing themselves and giving the association ideas as to what they would like to see. Some of them were just not possible. For example, a swimming pool. We looked into that. We had the YMCA people come down to visit with us. Basically what they said was, you don't have enough people. The population was too small. So it ended up in Greenwich, which is great. You can go to Greenwich now and exercise there. But from that small beginning, from a few people being interested, the ball just sort of grew larger and larger, and finally rolled into what we have today. So we're very grateful for those people who did give us the support. Now, the last talk is going to be with Jack Wade, but Jack Wade happened to live in Eagleville and heard about this project, and and it came up and expressed his interest to the board of directors, and so Jack Wade Associates was hired to be the architect of note in everything that was to be done in the building. And Jack Wade has done us a very good service in working here in Salem. There were other offices that were important. Preservation League of New York State always had grants money to do feasibility studies. The Historic Preservation Office, commonly known as SHPO, is important in helping you to look for money. And the other thing is they approve. They have to put their stamp of approval on whatever it is you're doing. And the courthouse has been very lucky, not only working with SHPO, but working with Kerry Warner, who has been very good to Salem and to his first name, Houston. What was the guy from Albany who came up to?
Carl Hasty.
I'm sorry, Carl.
Carl Hasty.
Right, Carl Hasty came up to see our lunch, learn, and play program and was so impressed with what we had here at the courthouse and what we were doing for the kids in the Salem area. He pledged $10,000 for the program. And that's in the process now, I understand, of going through the paperwork and getting the approval. But I never know who's going to walk through the door.
And Betty Little has given us funding.
Right, also. Interesting note, when Donna Farringen was here, a person came to the door and said, I need a phone right away, my phone went dead. So she said, come on in, use the phone. So he came in and used the phone, and they chatted a while. She gave him her card, and a week later she got a check in the mail for $1,000. I said, you should have let him use 3 phones. But things like that happen. If you have a good product, people will support it, and I think we have a great product here. Now, I said we've had good people and we've had good presidents. In case you don't remember, Bill Ubberly was our first president. We had Kay Tomasi, Peter Sauer, Jack Phillips, Bob Ben, and of course Bob Acklin, who was still president. And their leadership has been just exceptional. And we've been very fortunate in having that kind of leadership. Okay, the name of my talk was The Rest of the Story. If you have ever listened to Paul Harvey, you know, that's his byline. The rest of the story, and then out come all these little details you never hear about. I'm going to have to read part of this to you because it is quite detailed, but it is interesting because it gives you a good picture of what life was like in a jail in 1900. Remember I told you that there were structural changes in the courthouse and the jail, and nothing is new. We're still doing construction here. In reading the inventory of personal property at the courthouse, you never know what you're going to find when you go to Fort Edward and look in the archives there, or look up a deed, or you go through the minutes of the county. But they did, in 1900, did an inventory of everything that was here in the courthouse. So here's a list of things. Just consider, this is the 1900s. This is before the jail that we have here now was built in 1906. But here, in the courthouse storeroom, we have tables, chairs, slippers, whitewash brushes, bread baking tins, iron kettles, muffin rings, chimneys for lamps, mattress ticking, shades and globes for lamps, slop pails, very important, coal shuttles, and assorted men's and women's clothing. Now, what of those terms don't you understand? Anything? Ticking? Do you know what ticking is? Showing your age. Ticking is when you look at a mattress, nobody calls it ticking anymore, but back then the outer skin of the mattress, heavy cloth, was called ticking. And shades and globes for lamps,
Okay.
not electric lights. We're talking about kerosene lamps, slop pails.
That would be good, actually.
That was the only inside plumbing they had. Was a slop pail. There was no indoor plumbing at that time.
I thought that was used for like leftover food and you
Well,
saved it and fed the pigs.
also,
No.
not to save.
You didn't eat it, you didn't waste it.
Interesting story. Once my wife and I and daughter were visiting Salem on board one of the ships, the Mayflower, and you know, they're giving you a tour, and a woman is there doing her thing, never gets out of character, not one bit. And a little girl ran up to her and said, "Oh, how did they go to the bathroom on this ship?" And she just said, pointed to a pail and said, "Right there, child." You should have seen the look on the kid's face. Okay, other items that were necessary and found in the rooms. For example, in the courtroom, 20 cuspidors, 4 inkstands, 1 pen holder rack, 51 chairs, 2 tables, and a clock. The waiting room contained its own cuspidor, a table and chairs, carpet on the floor. The judge's room, these are all rooms upstairs. The judge's chambers were in back of the courtroom. Judge's room was more cordial. It contained a lounge, a smoking tray, a mirror, a table and chairs, an inkstand, and carpet on the floor. The witness room contained a round table, chairs, a sofa, 1 cuspidor, carpet on the floor, and a bookcase full of law books. The DA's office contained a round table, chairs, a lounge, an inkstand, a secretary, cuspidor, 2 pen racks, and a carpet on the floor. Carpet was a big thing back then.
Wow.
Grand jury room contained a long table, 24 chairs, 3 cuspidors, and another rug. And the 1 toilet room contained 1 towel, 1 tin cup, 1 comb, 1 brush, 1 looking glass, and I'm sure there was a container in there that was used as the toilet at that time, because there just wasn't anything.
Al, what's a cuspidor?
Okay, what's a
I'll be glad to.
cuspidor?
It's a container where you spit your tobacco.
Oh. Wow.
Right.
You chewed
Yep, yep.
and you
And then
spit.
Yep,
Yeah.
was
such
quite,
an elegant name.
was quite
for-
public.
Big round.
Now, the first floor main hall out here contained 10 chairs, 7 cuspidors. They add these up to get around 50 cuspidors all over the place. Well, they didn't want you to spit on the floor. However, that was difficult. My father belonged to an elk club in Leominster, Massachusetts, and in their lounge room, they had cuspidors all over the place, but you could tell where they were when they weren't even there because people didn't always hit the cuspidor.
Was that like before cigarettes or pipes?
No, you still had cigarettes and pipes, but people liked to chew.
Oh, they were,
Yeah.
yeah, chewing was big.
Oh, wow.
Or smoke cigars.
Yeah.
And again,
Oh,
you-
yeah, spit it out. Yeah.
Right. So we go on. We had 2 wire rugs, 2 coal stoves. 2 coal stoves. There was no central heating in this building. There was no steam. There were no boilers in the building. So the building was only heated by stoves. We had
I wonder how many cords of wood that would take.
yeah, a lot.
I
A
mean,
lot.
that would be insane. Oh, it's cold?
It's
Oh,
cold.
okay.
Yeah. Now, the sheriff's room, again, more chairs, a lounge, a secretary, a handcuff case, 2 pairs of handcuffs, and only 1 cuspidor. And 1 6-seat bench, a pair of shackles, 5 Yale locks, 1 inkstand, a paper rack, 1 law book, 1 keyboard case, 1 pair of twisters, a ledger, a clock, 1 record of prisoners, and a linoleum, which was evidently the name used at that time for linoleum, or somebody misspelled that, couldn't,
Okay.
on the floor. The surrogate's office, which is this room, had 2 writing desks, 1 clock, 6 ink stands. I'm surprised nobody's asked me about the ink stands. Do you know what an ink stand is? Well, if you were as old as I am, your desk at school would have a hole on one side and a little glass thing that fits in the hole with a top that could be open. And when the teacher wanted you to write in ink, she would come around with a bottle of ink and pour it in that little container and give you a pen with a steel nib at the end of it, and that's what you would use to write in ink. It was messy.
And she's left-handed. She would really have a tough time.
Yes, I remember left-handed students in my class. That was tough. Okay, we had a surrogate seal, wash bowl, pitcher, towel rack, 2 oil cans, 17 chairs, more cuspidors, a letter scale, a typewriter, whoa, an eyelet fastener, a lamp, a chair, more writing table, sofa stand, and a looking glass. The looking glass seems to be quite
Eyelet
popular.
fastener.
I don't know. An eyelet fastener. Is that buttons?
You mix,
Yeah.
puts an eyelet in a piece of fabric punch? It's
Probably.
like a hole punch looking.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
think. What's a twister?
Yeah.
Twister, that I don't know.
Yeah. Now,
Do you know what a twister is?
no, I don't know what a twister is. A twister is a dance, isn't it?
Well, we didn't have it on your list.
Well, hey, they had to entertain the prisoner somehow.
I think a twister was referred to as button shoe. It was an item with a semicircle that you cut off.
Okay, yeah, I know what you mean. Did everybody hear that? The twister was a device used to button shoes.
Button
Yeah.
shoes.
You should have seen some of those women's shoes.
Yes, that was before zippers.
We need
Now.
a Victorian themed party here.
Now, there are some things that existed outside that were very important to the courthouse at that time, but they are no longer there. The first was a stone building for storing tools and food. 1 lawnmower, 1 wheelbarrow, 2 snow shovels, 1 pair of ice tongs, 2 stone forks, 1 barrel of soap grease, 1 scythe, 5 long-handled shovels, 1 pickaxe, 21 stone hammers. 21 stone hammers.
I know what they were prisoners.
What were they for?
Well, some person connected with the jail decided that the prisoners, they could make money from the prisoners if they took big stones, rocks, and broke them up into gravel, and then they could sell the gravel.
Uh-huh.
But nobody would buy the gravel, so
That was-
they were stuck with all these.
Which, although that practice was very popular in the South. If you've heard of chain gangs, building roads, they were stone hammer gangs, and that's how they broke up the stones. 1 rip saw, 1 iron scoop shovel, 2 lengths gas pipe. I'll get back to that. 1 spade, a wood saw, 2 snow shovels, 6 flour barrels, 2 barrels of salt, and 4 pork barrels. The second outbuilding was the gas house. You had to light the building somehow, and they made their own gas here on the property.
Coal.
In which coal gas, yeah, it was made from coal. It fueled the gas lights in the courthouse and jail. If you go into the courtroom upstairs and you look on either side, you'll see some things sticking out of the wall. That's the end of a gas line. And those were attached to a lamp. And so when you wanted light, then you would, and if you watched the movie Gaslight, ever seen that movie?
Yes.
You would turn the gas on, you would light it, turn the gas on. And that's how they lighted the jail at that time. You made sure that you wanted to have it light, otherwise you were in big trouble if the gas got out and you were still there. And the jail yard contained 8 cords of wood. So that would have been for cooking, probably over in the sheriff's house. Facing East Broadway contained, back then, a horse stable, 1 pair of rubber boots, 1 scythe, 1 stone hammer, 1 saw, sprinkler pot, can of oil, a manure fork, shovel, 1 bottle of Vaseline, 1 broom, and 1 cake of soap. And the barn loft contained 1 hay fork and a half-ton of rye straw. On to the kitchen. The kitchen contained really too many items to mention, but some of the items, I reduced that one. Some of the items for cooking and feeding the prisoners were 66 ration tins, 60 pint cups, 3 spiders. Anybody know what a spider is? Yeah, Sally. You've got them all over your house. Did everybody hear her answer? Yeah. It's a cast iron pan, frying pan sort of, with 3 legs. 3 iron kettles, 1 coffee mill, 6 lamps, a cooking range, a refrigerator, and 5 pounds of graham flour. Now, a refrigerator. Yeah, ice box. Some of you remember, who here has had an ice box when they grew up?
We did. No, when we were first married, we lived in housing up in Middletown when John was in college, and we had an ice box.
Yeah.
And so many people ahead of us had never bothered to get the water out, so it sat over a big hole in the ground and we just let it drip through.
Yeah, I grew up with an ice box too.
I didn't grow up with one, but...
Well, during World War II, you couldn't buy a refrigerator anyway, so we all had ice boxes. And graham flour, 5 pounds of graham flour. Now, the kitchen pantry contained the dinnerware and service, cooking utensils, cleaning tools. In the coal room, there were 17 tons of coal for the house and kitchen. So the coal room, I'm assuming, was in the basement of the jailer's house. 3 coal hods, a coal shovel, fire shovel, and 11 cans of chloride of lime. Anybody know what that would be used for?
Sanitation.
Yeah, an outhouse. The jailer's house cellar contained storage space for more food, 5 barrels of potatoes, 6 sugar barrels, 7 pork barrels, a half barrel of beans, a half barrel of vinegar, 20 flour barrels, a meat cleaver, 2 axes, 4 30-gallon jars, 2 washing machines, 1 wringer, a hash machine. I know what hash is, but I'm not sure what. I'm assuming, yeah, it's a grinder. Yeah. 1 cupboard, a butcher knife, and a potato scoop. And in the jail cellar, they had a small coal stove, a grindstone, 11 grates for furnace, shovels, wheelbarrows, 77 tons of coal, and in the cellar stairway, 30 pounds of tobacco. See, we needed those spittoons. And a hogshead of globes for electric lights. So they had some electricity. The janitor's room contained a cot bed, 1 mattress, 4 pair of blankets, 1 pillow, 1 chair, and 1 matting, and you know what he did most of the day. Now, the wooden jail, tell you a little bit about that, contained 12 jail cells on the first floor. Of the 2 were set up as washing facilities, 1 for personal hygiene, 1 for laundry. No indoor plumbing was available for prisoners of today's standards. Each cell contained 1 bucket. There's your bucket. Ticking and bedding for the double or single cot, 1 lamp, 1 inkstand, 1 chair, 2 cups, 2 pans. Second floor contained more cells for men and a 2-bunk women's room. They did house women here. In addition, the women's room contained 2 tables, 1 oil stove, and a tin pail. The separate boys' room contained 3 bunks, 1 bucket. The only steel cell containing the same comforts as the wooden cells. 18 Yale padlocks kept the prisoners in. The jail corridor, again, more customers, 9, 1 coal stove, 2 coal hods, 1 wash basin, and a hot water barrel. The cash on hand, according to this survey, was noted as $3.02. and due from the poor master of Salem, $78.50. So, the creature comforts were pretty meager in 1900, but by design. Now, although heating by coal and oil was the norm at the time, and the courthouse proper had some electric lights, jailhouse electric lights were not an accessory. Jail life was hard, and the supply of stone hammers indicates that on some occasion it was even harder. By 1906, all of this had changed when the state said the jail had to be upgraded for penal and safety codes, and the existing 1869 courthouse and the 1906 jail look today as much as they did then. With the exception now that we have electric lights all over the courthouse, and we have central heating with boilers in the basement. And basically this courthouse is one of the few remaining structures of the architectural style of that time in the county. It's a unique building. People who come in say, wow. And I say, it hasn't changed much except for the electric lights, really. But it's held up well. The architect did a good job, and the people, the contractors who built it, did a good job. So,
Didn't it take only like 6 months to build, or wasn't it like
I don't
less
have
than a
those
year?
minutes here, but you might be right. I'm not sure. She thought maybe it took 6 months to
Yeah, I
build.
think it was, Bob, do you know that?
Well, when I read about it, it took a while to, they started in 1869, and of course they had to put the foundation in after the frost went out. So that took them until about the middle of June, and then they started the rest of the building. And by December of that year, they had the big celebration, the building was finished. The jailer's house was built, and the jail had been moved. So everything was in place, and it only took that long to do it.
And it only
So they had
cost,
an army of workers that had to be to build a brick building with all the bricks involved. The interior walls here in the hallway are brick too, so an awful lot of brickwork. And it's fancy brick too. If you look at it carefully on the outside, there's a lot of detail in the brickwork, and it's really quite an interesting building as a result, and a lot of archwork also.
Right.
Around the windows and on the doors and so on.
Yeah, the aesthetics of the building, Cummings did a terrific job, and I think he had an eye for beauty. And even though this was to be a courthouse and a jail, all the little, if you walk around, you can see all the little features, the stained glass windows, the arches, things of that sort. Just, I guess
And
we
the
can't
other-
say that it's home, but it certainly is a much better atmosphere than if we were just four walls and a roof.
And the other unique thing about it is that the trim wood work is in chestnut. So there's, a tree that no longer grows
Right.
in this area, but was quite plentiful at that time. And so most of the woodwork and the trim and the benches upstairs in the courtroom itself are made of chestnut. So.
and it actually came from a mill in Easton that was known for making, like all the doors that you see, that was from the mill in Easton, the chestnut mill.
Yes. Okay. Larry,
There
question?
was a courthouse built in Hudson Falls just a year after this one, I believe.
Yep.
Was that the same architecture?
Yes.
Yes, but this is the better building. No, I mean, really, this is the better building. I have been in the building over there, and this one, I think, just has more
atmosphere and beauty to it than the Fort Edward one.
That's in Hudson Falls.
Yeah.
Hudson Falls, yeah. And now it's a restaurant, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Forged, I think.
Yeah. Any other questions before I turn the program over to the more interesting
Come
person?
on.
Okay, Kay, you're on.
Thank you.
By this time, everything has flown from my brain. So I don't know where to begin. In fact, Al stole a line or two from my My talk. So can you hear me in the back? Because, cool. Well, I started out by, my talk by thinking back how this all started for me. And at that time, you remember there was effort to record all the stories from World War II veterans. They were dying at the rate of 1,500 veterans a day. So there are still some of them living and they're still recording them, but I know they did many recordings, and I think there's many of them over in Saratoga. So anyway, I thought about that in relation, and I was wondering, thinking about the things that were vanishing in our society along with veterans of World War II. And I was thinking of these small towns, you know, now I think small stores are closing everywhere. And I thought, there aren't going to be that many cemeteries anymore. And along with those thoughts, then of course I thought about the rural jails, because those, if you remember that TV show, I don't know, Barney and whatever the name of the sheriff was, Andy Griffith, and I always thought of that in reference to the jail here. And a couple of times I came over for some reason or other when they were having visiting night, and the courthouse was, as Al said, lined with chairs and benches, and people were smoking everywhere. Man, when they started repairing or painting this place, wow, the walls were just dripping with, I don't know, nicotine or whatever, and it was bad. And in addition to that, there were kids running around everywhere, you know, it was like family night here. Well, anyway, that's how it all began. And also, when I came to the area, I was told, as Al pointed out, that if you want to commit murder and get away with it, do it in Washington County. You'll never be convicted. But then on the other hand, I had a friend who was looking for a place to live here in the area. She was from New York City, and she said, this is the place for me, she said. They have stained glass windows in the jail. So anyway, all good things. All good things. And then I thought, well, I would just like to learn about the jail. I want to say at this point, there are probably people in this audience who know a lot more about this jail than I do. And if you have something, a story to tell or something, you know, well, we'll tell it, you know. You just say it and tell the story. I know that, everybody's frowning at me. Anyway, I looked around for people who had some experience with the jail. And I think the first person I probably videotaped was Louise Rogers. Now I have to say that when I looked through my little book here, A Bed for the Night, I couldn't, Al asked me to bring some, you know. I couldn't find them. I don't think, I have a few left, but not many, and I think the only place you can get them is probably now at the bookstore, and Cambridge has a few. But anyway, getting back to the jail. The kids around in the area here who lived in the neighborhood, sort of the jail or the courthouse was a big playground for them. Al didn't mention the things that went on up in the courthouse, but one of the kids playing hide and seek with the dogs up there and finally getting kicked out. But there was a freedom around here, around the jail, in the courthouse. People seemed to be very much at home. around here. There are some early stories that I'm going to tell. One involves the courthouse, and I don't know. It involves the fact that there was a trial going on in the courthouse, and people were there, and suddenly a leg came through the roof. Okay, so you can imagine that was a pretty stunning occurrence, and I think the second leg came, and people didn't know what to do, and then of course they started to laugh. But anyway, it turned out that some trustee had stashed his girlfriend up there in the attic part, and she was a little heavy, but I think that, she fell through. So that was one of the first great stories about the courthouse and the jail. Going then into the jail, let me see where to start. Well, if you haven't seen the jail, of course, if you haven't been in there, everybody been in to see the jail?
Yeah.
You know what it looks like? Okay. And there were 14, I think, cells on the first floor and the second floor. And the third floor is varied from time to time. Of course, sometimes, I think at one time there were only 2 people in the jail. But when I started hearing stories about the jail, it was a lot different than I expected. It seemed to me belong to a kinder, gentler time, and maybe that's only because of the things I was hearing. But at one time, there was no shelter here in Salem, you know, and there have been some pretty bad times in our country when people didn't have jobs, and there were a lot of poor, and there were people who, as there are now, have no place to go for the night. They don't have homes. And in this case, in Salem, some guys would just be out all summer, and then when it began to get cold, like they would break a window or get in a fight, and then they would be sentenced to go to jail. So then they would have, they would have shelter, they would have food, and they could get through the winter. We had, as I say, the jail went through various times, though, depending sometimes on the times and the sheriff. And there was one sheriff that I think kind of was head and shoulders above the rest. His name was Theodore Buckley, and at the time he was sheriff, he thought, you know, you could be rehabilitated, you know, not necessarily just punished for what you did. And so at that time there were lots of arts and crafts and things going on. Some of you may have furniture or something that the prisoners had made. They worked. One of them I know did refinishing cars. So there was something for them to do, and of course in the jail also they had classes. They could go to school. They could get their GED if they finished the course. Some of you know the Wild Burgers. I think they're both gone now. I'm not sure. Owen died several years ago. But they had classes. I think at some times the guards resented the prisoners who were getting all kinds of perks that they didn't think they should get. It should be, I think, straight punishment, and shouldn't be given the advantage of all these things. But Owen and Sue, they loved that work. She told me it was a really wonderful time for her. They had no trouble with the prisoners. And of course, if somebody did cause trouble, I'm sure it was taken out. But they just had no problem at all. And some of them did get their GEDs. And some of them did not, of course. For the jail, there were church services, and there were, let me see, there were church services, and there was some other event they could go to. But, oh yes, Ray Short, who was a psychologist from Cambridge, came and had group discussions. And of course, he would be upstairs. He told me that one time. He was upstairs, he got locked in. I mean, there was just an incredible amount of freedom in the early days when the kids would come and people would bring candy for the prisoners, and they're just, they were part of the townspeople. I don't know, you probably would like to hear more exciting things about the jailbreaks. Well, one of those happened with when there was a church service, okay? They had a church service downstairs, and it was, I think, Fred Russo, who was one of the guards. And I use the term guard because I always forget what the real name is supposed to be. What is it, Al? I don't know. Well, guard is good enough, okay. So, that's really what they did. But anyway, there was a church service downstairs. It was down in the basement. And so the prisoners were coming up, and one of them knocked Fred over, and two of them then came upstairs, and apparently someone had left the window open for them down here and on the first floor, and they escaped. Now, one of them got away for a few days, but one of them was apprehended right away. But there was, well, I should tell you about the jailbreak. This was a very fun one. Some of you, I know Nancy Roundtree told me this story because she lived on Archibald Street, and there was a jailbreak. Okay, and she loved being at school over here. She could look out the window and see everything. She loved it when there was something happening at the jail or the courthouse. It made Salem a little bit more exciting when that did happen. But there was a jailbreak, and I think there were 2 people involved in this one. And one of them, I think they separated, and one of them went in the field behind Nancy's father's barn, okay? And then came into the barn, and her father looked into the barn and saw that he was there, and then went in and called the police. And they did apprehend him. But another one was, oh, I know what was so fun about that one was the fact that, this is really hard to believe for me, but the fact that these guys escaped they're out in the playground out there, well, where they used to go out for an hour a day for exercise, etc. They're out there, and these guys stacked one picnic table on top of the other one, and climbed over, and they went. And just imagine, I mean, that was just unbelievable, just unbelievable. Yeah, she said they had, everyone in Salem had a good laugh about that. That is for sure. Well, then of course, then they put up the barbed wire up there, which was made things harder. But someone did get over that and was severely injured, actually. But if you wanted to escape from the Salem jail, it wasn't too bad. You could really get out. But I have to tell you, Sally.
Didn't they always do it when the corn was called?
Yes, that's what I'm just going to tell you. Yes, they all, yes. Somebody back there has a, did you
I
have?
almost ran over 2 guys with a truck.
Oh my
Because
goodness.
I grew up in the house just across the brook. So I walk by this place every day to go to school. And I was just out of college. I had fed the animals up there. Coming back across the bridge with a big truck. She's right, the corn was tall. The joke got to be the annual August jailbreak.
You're so right.
3 years in a row.
You're so right. Once that corn got up.
So I came across the bridge, and they came running out of the cornfield about the time I got there with the truck, and I damn near ran 2 of them over. But I didn't hit them. And, so by the time I got over here by the sheriff's house, there was 3 guards coming out. I don't know if they had their guns in the air, but they had their hand on the gun. So I stopped the truck, and I got out. I said, they went that way. Somebody must have been waiting for them, 'cause I think that was the time when it took them a couple weeks to find them.
Well, I think the ones that got away had someone waiting for them, because a lot of the guys, they didn't know the area. If they escaped here in like a hot summer day and mosquitoes and all the not knowing where they're going, you know, and it was, they were usually apprehended very quickly.
Were they serious criminals?
Well, you see, the really serious criminals went to the penitentiary. I should say that, yes, that they were not ordinarily, if they were very serious, and there were some serious guys here, then they were only here for a short time, ordinarily waiting for the trial, whether they're going to be convicted or not, and then they would be sent away. But there was some, let's see, there were, well, what is the most serious? There was an axe murderer who murdered his wife and his niece with an axe. That was pretty serious, I figured. And so he didn't stay there long. You know, when I did arrive, though, one of the first cases, after I'd heard Al's saying about, you know, if you want to commit murder, do it in Washington County. I was looking for a house to live in up in this area. And I was out at the lake. We were renting a cabin at the lake so we could, you know, look around. And my kids were taking swimming lessons at the lake. And one morning, their swimming instructor didn't come. And so her name was Michelle, and we thought, oh, she just probably wasn't feeling well or whatever. Well, we found out, maybe you know more about her than I do.
Yes.
Yeah, I would love to hear that. But she'd been murdered.
On Colfax.
On Colfax, yeah, on Colfax. And I understand it was her boyfriend, and she was breaking up with him. And you know, that's a story you hear not too infrequently. So I was told that, I think this is it, that he was found by her body putting flowers. I don't know if that story is true or not, but that was part of it I got. But I think he was the one who was, when he went to jail, he was on, it was suicide watch, but they were afraid he was going to commit suicide, so he,
But he was here, right?
yes, yes, he was. The worst case, of course, you probably all know this if you lived in here, was the Yarter story. The Yarter, Y-A-R-T-E-R. That was, there was a girl who was murdered. I think she was 16 years old. Al probably knows more details about all this stuff. But anyway, she was murdered, and this man was a suspect. And so he, they did call him for questioning, and he had all these different stories, and finally admitted he did know her. And then he said he had taken her, I don't know, to the road, not sure, the North Way, whatever, and she was going to leave this area. I suppose running away, whatever. But anyway, because when it came to trial, he convinced them that he had been beaten and he had bruises and stuff on his body, that his confession was coerced and could not be used in the trial. So he went free. Well, that guy was a bad guy, let me tell you. He had crimes in Pennsylvania and I believe 2 other states, but he went to Florida and he raped 2 girls who were from the Canadian skating team. They were down there in Florida. I think they were the Olympic, I'm not sure they were Olympic team, but they were Canadian skating team. And he raped 2 girls, those 2 girls. And he was bragging about, he was staying at a hotel, and there was a British officer there, a woman, connected with the justice system. And he bragged to her about having gotten away with murder. And man, she reported that right away, and he was then apprehended. But then, of course, he was wanted in these other states. Everywhere he was wanted, I think. Anyway, they did finally convict him. But that was one of the, I always thought maybe that was the case where they said, yes, go
I'd
ahead.
like to tell another.
Yes, I
Right.
love, anybody has a story, I'd love to hear it, and I'll write it down if you.
Well, one day I was in the oil office and I got a call. Well, it seems that one of the inmates went over the fence or got away some way. But he went through the cornfield and he came out in front of Janet and Bob Kretzler, the first house up here. So he went in front of their house, and I'm the second house, and he went behind my house and on over to the brook. Well, Janet Kretzler saw him and thought it strange, so she called my wife. So my wife called me. So I called here at the courthouse, and I think Tom Durkin was under sheriff then. And I said, Tom, are you missing anybody up there? He says, what do you mean? I said, well, I think one of your prisoners just went up through, and he's probably in White Creek headed for Blind Buck. Well, they found him up in Blind Buck that evening.
Wow. Yeah.
neighborhood watch.
Yes, that was really wonderful. Yes, well, that was another thing. A prisoner who escaped here, you see, pretty hard to not be noticed if you're mingling with the locals. Here in New York City, you know, no one's gonna notice, but here people would have noticed outsiders. And
Okay, I don't know if this is a real anecdote or not, but or maybe you're going to tell it. But the story I heard was that an escapee broke into, well, people don't lock their houses around here, and he went into a house. First he took clothes off the clothesline and put them on because he had his orange suit on.
Oh my gosh.
Then he went into the house, and the person that lived in the house was actually sleeping on the sofa, and he or she just said, "Oh, okay, I think I'm just going to pretend I'm still asleep." And this guy came in, made a sandwich in the kitchen,
Oh my God.
and left and carried another, you know.
Oh my
well, I don't know, it's kind of similar to the story about Evelyn Bramer. They were, he had, Mr. Bramer had surgery and they were sleeping downstairs, okay, because ordinarily they slept upstairs, but because of his surgery and having to climb upstairs, they were sleeping downstairs. So she heard the door quietly open in the kitchen, and this guy came in, and it's just pretty much the same, but he, on the kitchen table was a glass, was some Coca-Cola and part of a pizza that probably John had. And so the guy drank the Coke and ate the pizza, and then he looked in the refrigerator for something else to eat, and Evelyn had absolutely nothing in the refrigerator, if you can imagine when I think about my refrigerator. Nothing in the refrigerator but a bowl of plums that she'd cut up, she was going to can or what used for canning or jelly or something. And so he was not interested, so he just quietly left. And after he left, then she was sure he was gone, then she called and said that he was there. So, is that enough, Al? or-
Yes, that's great, Kay. Thank you.
I want to say one thing. Anybody who has any stories concerning the jail, please let me know. This book, I had a few copies, but I can't find them. I don't know where they are. But if I do find them, I'll.
She locked them up. Don't go away, because there's one last thing we have to do, and there was one story I did want to tell, which I'm not sure Kay is familiar with it. The kids in town used to come over to the jail. She talked about this being a rather relaxed jail, which it was. They would come over and visit with the prisoners, and the prisoners would make things. You know, they had time on their hands. They would make things, and they would give them to the kids. And some of those artifacts, those people brought in, and we do have them on display in the display case in the little hall over there. The plates and baskets and just amazing stuff. A belt made out of Lucky Strike cigarette packages.
Got those from Dolores Finette.
Yeah, so do that. And there was just one other story I wanted to tell, because this was Peter Cruikshank lived across the street, and he wrote a story saying he used to come over all the time and visit. And it just wandered through the jail and down in the basement. And one day, a tramp on the tracks got run over by a train and really damaged the leg. So they went over and got him and brought them here to the basement. And Dr. Orton came over and looked at him and said, "Oh, the only way to save him is to take his leg off," which they did, but the tramp passed away as it was. So they took the body away. And Peter was saying, "Yeah, I heard about that." And he said, "The next day I went over to the jail, and I'm wandering through the basement, and there's a leg." A leg. They'd forgotten to take the leg. So that's the one Halloween story about the jail.
Yeah.
Okay, Kate.
I have that, yeah.
Yeah, stay right here. We have a...
Well, thank you both very much. Little Bernie told me celebrate a very special birthday in a couple weeks. So I thought we could all sing happy birthday.
Oh, what a
And I
nice.
probably had candles, but I didn't bring
Listen,
candles.
you better be sure I get to my birthday.
But anyways, let's hit it, guys. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Kay. Happy birthday to you.
Goodness. Oh, what are we going to do?
I can cut it over
Thank you
here.
so
Yeah, we're going to eat that.
We're going to celebrate.
Yes.
Why don't you stand behind her and get a picture
Yeah.
of you with the camera?
Take your photo, and we'll
Hey,
take
would love it.
There we go. Look right here.
Perfect.